What if I told you that everything you believe about life is an illusion? That every dream you chase, every relationship you build, every achievement you fight for, none of it will last? Would you feel liberated or utterly lost? Today, we're diving into a debate between two of the most thought-provoking and extreme philosophers you may have never heard of, Albert Caraco and Julius Bahnsen. One tells us that life is meaningless, that we're merely drifting through an impermanent world, clinging to illusions of stability that will eventually crumble. The other argues that struggle is the very essence of human existence. That meaning is not given to us, but something we must carve out through hardship and perseverance. This is not just another philosophical discussion. This is about you, your struggles, your ambitions, your deepest fears about what it means to be alive. What if everything you thought about meaning, success, and purpose was a lie? And what if the truth was far more liberating than you ever imagined? We're going to explore how these two radical perspectives apply to real life, your relationships, your career, your personal growth. Are you making the biggest mistake by resisting change? Or are you missing out on the one thing that actually makes life meaningful? By the end of this video, you might just see the world and yourself in a way you never have before. Before we dive in, if you love deep conversations that challenge your worldview, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel for more mind-bending content. Your support helps keep these discussions alive, and if you'd like to go the extra mile, you can hit that super thanks button to show some love. All right, let's begin. Albert Caraco and Julius Bahnsen, two philosophers who explored the depths of human existence, offer radically different perspectives on the nature of life and its meaning. Their thoughts challenge our understanding of purpose, suffering, and the transient nature of reality. Caraco, a staunch nihilist, viewed life as inherently chaotic and devoid of intrinsic meaning. He saw human existence as a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of an indifferent universe. In contrast, Bahnsen, a tragic realist, argued that while suffering and conflict are unavoidable, they are also the very fabric of human identity. His philosophy revolved around the idea that meaning is not something given, but something we must create through struggle. Understanding these opposing views helps us navigate our own existential dilemmas. Caraco's perspective forces us to confront the possibility that everything we hold dear is transient, while Bahnsen challenges us to find purpose despite life's inherent hardships. These contrasting ideas are more than theoretical debates. They shape how we perceive our actions, relationships, and aspirations. Are we merely drifting through a meaningless existence? Or can we forge a purpose in a world that seems indifferent to our struggles? Philosophy is not just an academic pursuit. It has real-world implications that manifest in our daily lives. When we look at modern society, we see reflections of both Caraco's and Bahnsen's philosophies in the way people cope with life's uncertainties. For example, consider the rise of mindfulness and minimalist lifestyles. Many who embrace these practices unknowingly adopt elements of Caraco's philosophy, detaching themselves from material pursuits and recognizing the impermanence of all things. On the other hand, those who dedicate themselves to long-term goals, entrepreneurs, athletes, and artists, embody Bahnsen's idea that struggle is the essence of human existence. One of the best ways to understand the weight of these philosophies is through storytelling. Imagine a successful business executive who, after years of climbing the corporate ladder, realizes that everything he built is fragile. A market crash, a scandal, or even his own mortality could wipe away his achievements overnight. Caraco would argue that the executive's realization is an inevitable truth: nothing lasts, and all human efforts are ultimately futile. But Bahnsen would challenge this resignation. He would argue that the very act of striving, the sacrifices made, and the lessons learned are what give life meaning. Even if everything collapses, the struggle itself was valuable. These ideas are not limited to philosophy. They extend into literature, film, and even pop culture. Take, for instance, the character of Walter White in Breaking Bad. Initially a high school chemistry teacher, Walter turns to crime after being diagnosed with cancer. His transformation is a manifestation of existential dread, an acknowledgement that his life is fragile and could be erased at any moment. In many ways, his journey aligns with Caraco's perspective. He embraces chaos and discards traditional notions of morality. However, as the series progresses, Walter also embodies Bahnsen's philosophy by finding a twisted sense of purpose in his new identity. His struggles define him, and even in his darkest moments, he clings to the belief that his suffering was not in vain. A similar existential conflict can be seen in The Dark Knight, where the Joker and Batman represent two sides of this philosophical debate. The Joker, like Caraco, sees the world as inherently meaningless. He thrives on chaos, rejecting any notion of order or stability. Batman, however, embodies Bahnsen's perspective despite facing endless adversity. He refuses to give up. His struggle, though painful, is what gives him purpose. This dichotomy highlights a fundamental question. Is it better to accept the absurdity of life or to fight against it? The concept of impermanence is not new. Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism, have long emphasized the transient nature of existence. The idea of anicca, or impermanence, teaches that everything changes and that suffering arises from attachment to things that will inevitably fade. Caraco's philosophy echoes this sentiment, but takes it to a darker extreme. Rather than seeking enlightenment through detachment, he sees it as proof that life is inherently void of meaning. Bahnsen, on the other hand, aligns more with existentialist thinkers like Nietzsche, who argue that suffering is not to be avoided, but embraced as a means of self-discovery. Consider the story of Steve Jobs, a man who built one of the most influential companies in history. Throughout his career, Jobs experienced failure, betrayal, and illness. At one point, he was even ousted from the very company he founded. Yet, he persisted, returning years later to revolutionize technology. His story illustrates Bahnsen's belief that meaning is forged through struggle. Jobs could have succumbed to despair, accepting Caraco's notion that everything he built was fleeting. Instead, he chose to fight, using his setbacks as fuel to drive his vision forward. The tension between these two philosophies is deeply embedded in human history. Ancient civilizations rose and fell, yet each era produced individuals who refused to surrender to nihilism. The Renaissance was a response to the bleakness of the Middle Ages, a period where thinkers, artists, and scientists sought to redefine human potential despite the chaos around them. Bahnsen would argue that this was proof of humanity's resilience. Their struggles led to enlightenment. Caraco, however, would caution against placing too much value in such efforts, reminding us that even the greatest civilizations eventually fade into obscurity. The modern world is more uncertain than ever. Economic instability, political upheaval, and technological advancements have made the future unpredictable. Some respond by embracing Caraco's fatalism, choosing to live in the moment without concern for legacy or long-term meaning. Others, however, take Bahnsen's path, dedicating themselves to causes greater than themselves. The debate between these two perspectives is not about right or wrong. It is about how we choose to navigate life's uncertainties. In our personal lives, this existential divide manifests in different ways. Some people approach relationships with a Caraco-like mindset, accepting that nothing lasts and therefore avoiding deep emotional attachment. Others invest in their relationships despite the risks, believing that love, though impermanent, is still meaningful. The same applies to career choices, creative pursuits, and even how we view our mortality. Are we simply waiting for the inevitable end, or are we striving to leave a mark, however temporary? Ultimately, the philosophies of Caraco and Bahnsen force us to confront our own beliefs. They challenge us to question whether we are passive observers of life or active participants in its unfolding narrative. Perhaps the most profound takeaway from this discussion is that both perspectives hold truth. Life is fleeting, and everything we build will eventually fade, but that does not mean our efforts are meaningless. The value lies not in permanence, but in the process itself, the journey, the struggle, and the moments of clarity that define our existence. Albert Caraco was born into a Jewish family, a background that deeply influenced his worldview. He lived through periods of great upheaval, including World War II, which reinforced his belief in the impermanence and futility of human existence. Unlike many philosophers who sought meaning or order within chaos, Caraco embraced nihilism in its most absolute form. He saw life as nothing more than a fleeting illusion, an endless cycle of birth and death with no ultimate purpose. His disillusionment with human existence was so profound that he did not merely speculate about the absurdity of life, he lived it. In his most famous work, Post Mortem, he dismisses any notion of stability or permanence, rejecting the idea that life has any inherent value. Caraco's philosophy is often compared to that of thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Émile Cioran, who also grappled with the meaninglessness of existence. However, while Nietzsche encouraged the idea of creating one's own values, and Cioran embraced a poetic melancholy, Caraco took a more radical stance. He believed that humanity was doomed to self-destruction, and that civilization itself was nothing more than a temporary aberration. For him, human achievements, whether in science, art, or philosophy, were merely distractions from the inevitable conclusion: everything ends in nothingness. This perspective is reflected in the way he writes. His prose is stark, uncompromising, and devoid of sentimentality. He does not offer comfort or solace. Instead, he demands that the reader face the abyss head-on. In Post Mortem, he argues that human life is insignificant in the grand scheme of things, that our desire for meaning is a futile attempt to mask the terrifying truth of our mortality. The book reads like a funeral dirge for humanity, a lamentation on the absurdity of existence. He does not offer hope, only the cold, unyielding reality that life is transient and ultimately meaningless. Caraco's worldview might seem excessively bleak, but it resonates with many who feel alienated by the modern world. In an era where traditional religious beliefs have declined and material success often fails to bring true fulfillment, his philosophy strikes a chord with those who find themselves questioning the purpose of it all. The rise of existential anxiety and depression in contemporary society can, in many ways, be seen as a reflection of Caraco's ideas. When people realize that their careers, relationships, and ambitions are ultimately temporary, they may experience the same existential dread that Caraco articulated so powerfully. His philosophy is particularly relevant in the context of global crises. Wars, economic instability, and environmental destruction all serve as reminders of the fragility of human civilization. Caraco would argue that these events are not anomalies, but rather the natural order of things. He believed that humanity is inherently self-destructive, and that any attempt to impose order on chaos is ultimately futile. This perspective is evident in his critique of political systems, which he saw as temporary structures destined to collapse. Whether democracy, socialism, or dictatorship, he viewed all forms of government as mere illusions of control in a world that is fundamentally uncontrollable. However, while Caraco embraced nihilism, his philosophy does not necessarily lead to despair. For some, accepting the impermanence of everything can be liberating. If nothing truly matters in the grand scheme of things, then one is free to live without the burden of societal expectations. This is similar to the existentialist idea that one must create their own meaning in an indifferent universe. Though Caraco himself did not advocate for any particular way of living. Instead, he simply presented reality as he saw it, leaving it to the reader to draw their own conclusions. In contrast to Caraco, Julius Bahnsen approached the human condition from a different angle. He is often overshadowed by more prominent philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche. Yet his contributions to pessimism and tragic realism are significant. Bahnsen was heavily influenced by Schopenhauer's ideas on suffering and the will, but he diverged in crucial ways. Whereas Schopenhauer advocated for renunciation as a way to escape suffering, Bahnsen argued that suffering is an inescapable part of human existence. He believed that the internal conflicts we experience are not merely obstacles to be overcome, but are intrinsic to who we are. Bahnsen's philosophy is centered on the idea of tragic realism, the notion that life is fundamentally defined by contradiction and struggle. Unlike Caraco, who saw life's impermanence as a reason to embrace nihilism, Bahnsen saw it as the very source of meaning. He argued that humans are caught in a perpetual state of tension between their desires and the realities of the world. This struggle, rather than being something to be avoided, is what gives life its depth and significance. In his view, true self-awareness comes from confronting and embracing these contradictions rather than seeking to escape them. One of the key aspects of Bahnsen's thought is his emphasis on individuality. He believed that every person experiences conflict in a unique way and that the struggle for meaning is deeply personal. This idea can be seen in modern psychology, particularly in existential therapy, which emphasizes the importance of confronting one's inner conflicts rather than suppressing them. Many people today grapple with issues of identity, purpose, and self-worth, and Bahnsen's philosophy offers a framework for understanding these struggles as an inherent part of the human condition. A compelling example of Bahnsen's philosophy in action can be found in the world of sports. Consider an athlete who trains tirelessly for years, enduring pain, injuries, and setbacks, all for the chance to achieve greatness. The struggle itself, with all its hardships, is what defines the athlete's journey. Winning is not the only source of meaning. The process of striving, of pushing oneself beyond limits, is equally significant. Bahnsen would argue that this is true for all aspects of life, whether in art, science, or personal relationships. Meaning is found not in the absence of struggle, but within it. The contrast between Caraco and Bahnsen is striking. Caraco would look at the athlete and say that all of their effort is ultimately meaningless, that no matter how many records they break, they will eventually be forgotten. Bahnsen, on the other hand, would argue that the very act of striving is what gives the athlete's life meaning. Their perspectives are not merely academic, but have real-world implications for how people approach their own lives. Do we resign ourselves to the inevitability of oblivion, or do we embrace the struggle and find purpose within it? Bahnsen's ideas also resonate with the struggles of artists and creators. Many of history's greatest works of literature, music, and film have been born from conflict and hardship. Consider the life of Vincent van Gogh, who suffered from mental illness and poverty, but continued to paint despite his despair. His suffering was not incidental to his art, it was integral to it. Bahnsen would argue that Van Gogh's torment was not something to be eradicated, but something that fueled his creative genius. His paintings, filled with raw emotion and intensity, are a testament to the idea that struggle itself can be a source of profound beauty. The difference between Caraco and Bahnsen ultimately comes down to how one chooses to respond to the inherent suffering and impermanence of life. Caraco tells us to accept the void, to recognize that all human endeavors are ultimately futile. Bahnsen, on the other hand, urges us to engage with life fully, to find meaning not in permanence, but in the very act of striving. Both perspectives have merit, and both challenge us to think deeply about what it means to exist. In modern society, we see reflections of these philosophies in the choices people make. Some embrace Caraco's nihilism, living only for the moment and rejecting any notion of long-term purpose. Others take Bahnsen's path, dedicating themselves to personal and professional goals despite knowing that nothing lasts forever. These contrasting views continue to shape the way we understand ourselves and our place in the world. whether we choose to surrender to nihilism or find meaning through struggle. The question remains the same. How do we make sense of a world that offers no clear answers? Albert Caraco's philosophy is rooted in the fundamental belief that nothing is permanent. Everything that exists will eventually deteriorate, dissolve, and disappear, whether it be civilizations, ideologies, personal relationships, or even human consciousness itself. He rejected the comforting illusion of stability, arguing that life is in a constant state of flux and that attempts to impose permanence on an impermanent world are not only futile but delusional. His writings are not merely observations of change, but urgent calls for people to embrace impermanence rather than fear it. The more we cling to the idea that things should remain the same, the more suffering we bring upon ourselves. History offers countless examples of Caraco's philosophy in action. One of the most striking is the fall of the Roman Empire. At its peak, Rome was considered the most powerful civilization in the world, an empire that spanned continents and influenced culture, politics, and warfare for centuries. To the Romans, their dominance seemed eternal. However, despite their advancements in governance, engineering, and military strategy, the empire eventually crumbled. Corruption, economic instability, and external invasions all played a role, but at its core, Rome fell because nothing lasts forever. Caraco would argue that this is not an exception, but the rule. Every empire, no matter how grand, is subject to the same inevitable decay. The belief in the permanence of power is one of the greatest illusions of human history. The same principle applies to ideologies and belief systems. What was once considered an unshakable truth often becomes obsolete over time. Consider the evolution of scientific thought. At one point, the Earth was universally believed to be the center of the universe. This geocentric model was defended by religious institutions and scholars alike. Yet it was eventually replaced by the heliocentric model of Copernicus and Galileo. The shift was not just a change in astronomical understanding, it was a complete upheaval of the way people viewed their place in the cosmos. What was once heresy became accepted truth. Caraco's perspective forces us to acknowledge that even our most deeply held beliefs are not immune to the passage of time. Just as past generations were wrong about fundamental aspects of reality, so too will our current knowledge be challenged and revised. In the modern world, we see Caraco's ideas manifest in the rapid evolution of technology and social structures. The internet has drastically reshaped the way people communicate, work, and think. Only a few decades ago, physical books, newspapers, and television were the primary sources of information. Today, they are being replaced by digital media, streaming services, and artificial intelligence. Social media platforms rise and fall with astonishing speed. MySpace, once the dominant social network, is now a relic of the past. Facebook, which once seemed invincible, is losing ground to newer platforms like TikTok. The entertainment industry is another clear example. Celebrities who were once household names can fade into obscurity almost overnight, replaced by new faces in an endless cycle of cultural turnover. This extends to businesses and economic structures as well. The corporate world is filled with companies that once dominated industries, but failed to adapt. Blockbuster was once synonymous with movie rentals, but was rendered obsolete by Netflix's streaming model. Kodak, a pioneer in photography, failed to transition to digital cameras despite having the technology to do so before its competitors. These companies did not necessarily collapse due to mismanagement alone. They suffered because they clung to outdated models, refusing to acknowledge the impermanence of their success. Caraco's philosophy suggests that those who embrace change rather than resist it are the ones who survive. Even personal identity is not as stable as we like to believe. People often see themselves as fixed entities, with personalities and values that remain consistent throughout life. However, anyone who has looked back on their younger self knows how drastically their perspectives, priorities, and behaviors have shifted over time. The person you were 10 years ago is not the person you are today, and the person you are today will not be the person you are 10 years from now. Friendships and romantic relationships are similarly impermanent. People grow apart, circumstances change, and bonds that once seemed unbreakable can dissolve without warning. Caraco would argue that resisting this reality only leads to unnecessary suffering. Instead of mourning the loss of what was, we should learn to appreciate experiences for what they are: temporary but meaningful. This philosophy can be difficult to accept because humans are naturally inclined toward attachment. We seek stability in relationships, careers, and personal identities, hoping that certain things will remain constant in an ever-changing world. However, Caraco's perspective challenges us to rethink this approach. Instead of clinging to illusions of permanence, we should embrace the fluid nature of existence. This does not mean that we should become apathetic or indifferent. Rather, it means that we should fully engage in life while understanding that everything we build, love, and experience is temporary. There is a certain freedom in this realization. If nothing is permanent, then failure is not final. If relationships end, it does not mean they were meaningless. If careers shift, it does not mean time was wasted. Everything has its time and place, and then it passes. The idea that we must preserve things exactly as they are is an unnecessary burden. Consider the way people react to aging. Many view growing older as a tragedy, something to be resisted at all costs. Billions of dollars are spent on anti-aging products, plastic surgery, and wellness trends designed to slow down the inevitable. But what if we approached aging differently? What if, instead of seeing it as a decline, we viewed it as just another stage in the natural cycle of existence? Caraco's philosophy encourages us to stop resisting the inevitable and instead find beauty in the process of change. This mindset is especially useful when dealing with loss. Whether it be the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, or the collapse of a dream, impermanence is often accompanied by grief. However, rather than seeing loss as a tragedy, Caraco's perspective invites us to see it as a fundamental aspect of existence. Everything that comes into our lives is temporary, and that includes the people we love. This does not make their presence any less meaningful, it makes it more meaningful. If we accept that nothing lasts forever, we can learn to cherish things while they are here, rather than taking them for granted or living in fear of their eventual disappearance. This perspective also applies to personal ambitions. Many people put off their dreams, assuming that they will have time later. They delay happiness, waiting for the perfect moment. But Caraco's philosophy reminds us that there is no permanence, no guarantee of tomorrow. If everything is fleeting, then the only time to truly live is now. This does not mean reckless indulgence, but rather a deep appreciation for the present moment. It means pursuing what matters to us without the illusion that things will remain static. One of the most powerful examples of this mindset in action is in the world of sports. Consider an athlete at the peak of their career. No matter how dominant they are, their physical abilities will eventually decline. Records will be broken, legacies will be rewritten, and younger competitors will take their place. Some athletes struggle with this reality, desperately trying to hold on to their former glory. Others, however, embrace the impermanence of their success and transition gracefully into new roles: coaching, mentoring, or even entirely different careers. The difference between these two reactions is the ability to accept change rather than fight it. Caraco's philosophy might seem bleak to some, but in reality, it is a call to awareness. By acknowledging the impermanence of everything, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. We stop seeing change as an enemy and begin to recognize it as the essence of life itself. Everything we love, everything we work for, and everything we experience is temporary. But that does not mean it is meaningless. In fact, it is this very impermanence that makes life so precious. If nothing lasted forever, there would be no urgency to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, the warmth of a conversation, or the joy of a fleeting moment. The key is not to resist change, but to flow with it, understanding that impermanence is not a flaw in the design of life, it is the design itself. Julius Bahnsen rejected the idea that life struggles were meaningless burdens to be endured. Unlike Albert Caraco, who saw the chaos and impermanence of life as evidence that existence itself was futile, Bahnsen believed that struggle was not only inevitable, but also the very thing that gave life meaning. His philosophy centered around the idea that human beings exist in a state of perpetual conflict, not just with the world around them, but also within themselves. The contradiction between our desires and the harsh realities of existence is not something to be avoided. Rather, it is the foundation of our identity. It is through this tension, through hardship and suffering, that people define themselves and find purpose. Life is never as simple as wanting something and immediately obtaining it. Every individual faces obstacles, whether they be external challenges like financial hardship, illness, or failure, or internal struggles like self-doubt, fear, or regret. Bahnsen believed that it is precisely in facing these obstacles that people carve out their personal meaning. The stories of history's most admired figures reinforce this idea. Some of the most celebrated individuals across different fields from art to business, sports to science achieved greatness, not in spite of their struggles, but because of them. One of the most profound examples of this philosophy in action is the life of Vincent van Gogh. By all conventional measures of success, Van Gogh was a failure during his lifetime. He struggled with mental illness, poverty, and social isolation, selling only a single painting while he was alive. Yet, his internal battles were inseparable from his artistic genius. His suffering fueled his creativity, allowing him to produce works that conveyed an emotional depth few artists could match. Today, his paintings are considered some of the most valuable and beloved in the world. Bahnsen would argue that Van Gogh's struggles were not meaningless misfortunes, but the very essence of his artistic legacy. Without them, he would not have created Starry Night, The Sunflowers, or any of his masterpieces. His torment was not a roadblock, it was his reason for painting in the first place. This idea extends beyond the world of art. Consider the journey of an athlete training for the Olympics. Years of intense physical pain, grueling workouts, and sacrifices define their path. They endure injuries, setbacks, and moments of self-doubt, yet they push forward. The struggle itself is what makes victory meaningful. A gold medal won without effort or adversity would carry no significance. In the same way, an entrepreneur who builds a successful company often faces years of rejection, financial risk, and sleepless nights. The failures along the way do not render their achievements meaningless. Instead, they make success all the more meaningful. Bahnsen's philosophy suggests that those who embrace struggle, rather than resist it, find the deepest sense of fulfillment. The modern world is filled with stories of people who have embodied this perspective. Take Elon Musk, for example. Before Tesla and SpaceX became household names, he faced numerous financial and technical failures. In 2008, both companies were on the brink of collapse, and he had to choose whether to split his remaining funds between them or let one fail. Had he not endured years of setbacks, he would not have built two of the most influential technology companies of our time. If struggle were something to be avoided, Musk and countless others like him would have never achieved their goals. In entertainment, the story of J.K. Rowling follows a similar pattern. Before Harry Potter became a worldwide phenomenon, she was a struggling single mother who had been rejected by multiple publishers. At her lowest point, she lived in near poverty, but she continued writing. The very adversity she faced gave her the resilience to push forward. The rejection letters, the financial struggles, and the doubts she had about herself were not roadblocks, but steps in her journey. Bahnsen's philosophy would argue that the very existence of her hardships gave her success its weight and significance. This pattern is not unique to famous figures. Everyday people experience this dynamic in their own lives. A student struggling to complete a degree, a parent working long hours to support a family, an individual overcoming personal trauma. Each of these struggles shapes identity and purpose. If we were to remove adversity from life, would anything truly have meaning? Bahnsen would say no. Meaning is forged in hardship, not in its absence. This perspective is also crucial in relationships. The strongest bonds between people are not built in times of ease, but in moments of challenge. Friendships that endure through difficulties, marriages that survive hardships, and families that stay together despite differences. These are relationships with depth and meaning. A life without struggle might be comfortable, but it would also be empty. It is through overcoming obstacles together that people find connection and purpose. Some might argue that suffering should be minimized whenever possible. After all, no one seeks out pain for its own sake. However, Bahnsen's philosophy does not advocate for needless suffering. Rather, it recognizes that hardship is unavoidable and that attempting to escape it robs life of its depth. The pursuit of a life free of struggle is ultimately a pursuit of a shallow existence. Comfort without challenge leads to stagnation. A person who never experiences adversity never grows. In contrast, those who embrace struggle, who fight through hardship and emerge stronger, are the ones who leave a lasting impact on the world. One of the most relevant modern examples of this idea can be found in technology and business. The rise of artificial intelligence and automation is making life easier in many ways, but it also raises an important philosophical question. If struggle is what gives life meaning, what happens when struggle is removed? Imagine a future where AI can do everything for us, where jobs no longer require effort, where creative pursuits are instantly perfected by algorithms, and where challenges are eliminated. Would this be a utopia, or would it lead to a sense of emptiness? Bahnsen's perspective suggests that a life without struggle would not be paradise, but a meaningless void. Without the need to overcome, without the need to strive, what purpose would remain? This is not to say that hardship should be romanticized or that suffering should be sought out unnecessarily. Rather, Bahnsen's philosophy is a call to reframe how we view adversity. Instead of seeing struggle as something to be feared or avoided, we should see it as an integral part of life's meaning. The obstacles we face are not barriers to happiness, but essential components of it. They force us to grow, to adapt, and to push beyond our limits. For those who feel overwhelmed by difficulty, this perspective offers a powerful shift in mindset. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we can ask, "What can this struggle teach me?" Instead of seeing failure as an endpoint, we can view it as a necessary step on the path to success. Every hardship carries the potential for growth, and it is in the very act of enduring that we find meaning. Bahnsen's ideas challenge the modern obsession with ease and convenience. In a culture that often prioritizes instant gratification, his philosophy reminds us that true fulfillment is not found in avoiding difficulty, but in facing it head-on. Whether in art, business, sports, relationships, or personal growth, the struggles we endure are what define us. Without them, life would be nothing more than an empty existence devoid of purpose. By embracing struggle, by leaning into adversity rather than running from it, we unlock the deepest and most profound aspects of the human experience. If Albert Caraco and Julius Bahnsen were to engage in a philosophical debate, the conversation would be a stark contrast between resignation and resilience, between surrendering to the impermanence of life and using it as fuel to create meaning. Caraco, with his nihilistic outlook, would argue that nothing lasts, and because everything eventually fades, all human efforts are ultimately futile. There is no point in fighting for something that will inevitably be erased by time. No purpose in constructing meaning in a world that is indifferent to our existence. He would say that whether it be civilizations, personal achievements, or relationships, all are subject to decay. And the very idea of struggling against this reality is a waste of energy. In Caraco's view, the wisest thing a person can do is accept the impermanence of life and stop clinging to the illusion that anything holds lasting significance. Bahnsen, on the other hand, would counter this argument with an assertion that struggle itself is what makes life meaningful. He would agree that nothing lasts forever, but rather than seeing this as a reason to give up, he would see it as a reason to fight even harder. Precisely because things are imperfect, precisely because life is difficult, it is the effort to create meaning that defines who we are. Human beings are caught in a constant state of contradiction. Our desires pull us in one direction, while reality often pulls us in another. But this tension, rather than being a curse, is what gives our existence depth. If we gave up every time we face an obstacle, there would be no progress, no growth, and no reason to continue living with any sense of purpose. This philosophical clash can be seen reflected in the choices people make every day. There are those who, like Caraco, accept that everything will eventually come to an end and choose to disengage from struggle. They might avoid deep relationships for fear that they will eventually be lost. They might reject ambition because they believe success is fleeting. They might retreat from personal development, seeing no point in trying to improve when all efforts will ultimately be erased. This mindset is not necessarily rooted in despair, but in a belief that resisting the inevitable is futile. On the other hand, there are those who, like Bahnsen, understand that life's difficulties are not obstacles, but opportunities. They recognize that even though nothing lasts forever, that does not mean their efforts are meaningless. A musician who spends years perfecting their craft knows that their songs may one day be forgotten, but that does not stop them from creating. A scientist working toward a groundbreaking discovery knows that their work may one day be replaced by newer theories, yet they persist. A parent raising a child knows that their influence will fade as the child grows, yet they continue to nurture and guide them. Meaning is not found in permanence, but in the process itself. This debate also extends to broader historical and cultural contexts. Caraco might point to fallen empires and vanished civilizations as proof that no human endeavor is ever truly lasting. The great wonders of the world, from the pyramids to the Colosseum, will eventually erode. The philosophies and religions that once guided entire societies have been replaced over time. The achievements of today will be the relics of tomorrow. For him, this is evidence that no amount of effort can withstand the passage of time. Bahnsen, however, would look at the same history and see something different. He would argue that just because something does not last forever does not mean it was meaningless. The Roman Empire may have fallen, but its impact shaped the course of Western civilization. The works of great thinkers, even those long gone, continue to influence minds today. Even if something eventually disappears, its existence at one point in time mattered. The impact of our actions, no matter how fleeting, is what gives them significance. Consider modern-day entrepreneurs and artists. A person starting a business knows that companies rise and fall, yet they take the risk anyway. A filmmaker knows that movies are eventually forgotten, yet they pour their soul into storytelling. If people adopted Caraco's mindset completely, there would be no ambition, no creativity, no pursuit of excellence. If we accepted that everything is temporary and therefore meaningless, we would be paralyzed by inaction. At the same time, there is value in Caraco's perspective. A person who believes too much in their own ability to create something permanent may be setting themselves up for disappointment. History is littered with examples of individuals and societies that fought desperately to preserve something that was bound to change. Dictators have tried to maintain power through force, only to be overthrown. Companies that refuse to adapt to new technology have become obsolete. People who cling too tightly to relationships often find themselves crushed by the weight of their own expectations. There is wisdom in understanding that impermanence is inevitable. So, how does one reconcile these two opposing views? Rather than choosing between them, perhaps the most balanced approach is to integrate aspects of both philosophies. Caraco teaches us to accept the transient nature of life, to let go of the illusion that anything is truly permanent. By doing so, We free ourselves from unnecessary suffering caused by attachment to things that are bound to change. At the same time, Bahnsen reminds us that just because something is impermanent does not mean it lacks value. Struggle, growth, and effort are not pointless simply because they do not last forever. The act of striving itself is meaningful. In everyday life, this means learning to engage fully in the present while understanding that nothing is guaranteed. It means working hard on projects, relationships, and personal goals without becoming overly attached to the outcome. It means acknowledging that failure, loss, and change are inevitable, but not allowing that knowledge to deter us from living with intention and purpose. The best approach is one that allows for both acceptance and action, understanding that while everything will eventually fade, the time we have now is still worth investing in. There's also an emotional and psychological benefit to this synthesis. Those who adopt only Caraco's perspective may find themselves detached and indifferent, feeling that there is no reason to pursue anything in the first place. On the other hand, those who embrace only Bahnsen's perspective may find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of struggle, feeling that they must constantly push forward even when it leads to exhaustion. A balanced perspective allows us to work toward goals while maintaining the awareness that nothing is ever truly in our control. A practical example of this balance can be seen in relationships. Imagine someone who falls deeply in love but understands that relationships, by their nature, change over time. If they cling too tightly, fearing loss, they may suffocate the relationship. If they detach completely, believing all love is fleeting, they may never fully experience its depth. But if they approach love with both effort and acceptance, they can nurture a deep connection while also appreciating that change is inevitable. The same applies to career ambitions. A person might pour themselves into building a company or a creative pursuit, knowing full well that industries shift, markets evolve, and success is never permanent. But if they enjoy the process rather than fixating solely on the outcome, they will find fulfillment regardless of whether their work stands the test of time. This is the lesson that emerges when we take the best of both Caraco's and Bahnsen's worldviews. In the end, this debate is not about proving one philosophy right and the other wrong. Both perspectives have merit, and both challenge us to think more deeply about our own existence. Caraco forces us to confront the reality that nothing lasts, stripping away illusions of permanence. Bahnsen challenges us to see struggle as something valuable rather than something to be avoided. Together, they present a way of living that acknowledges the fleeting nature of all things while still embracing the beauty of effort, growth, and experience. By integrating these ideas, we develop a richer understanding of what it means to live. We learn to accept change without becoming passive, to strive without becoming consumed by ambition, and to find meaning in the journey rather than in the illusion of permanence. The contrast between Caraco and Bahnsen is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a reflection of the internal struggle that every person faces at some point in their lives. Whether we lean toward one philosophy or the other, their dialogue remains a timeless reminder that the search for meaning is, in itself, a fundamental part of being human. In the real world, the philosophies of Albert Caraco and Julius Bahnsen manifest in ways that shape how people approach business, relationships, and personal growth. Life is a constant interplay between change and perseverance, between accepting impermanence and striving for meaning. Understanding how these two seemingly opposing perspectives apply to everyday situations allows us to make better decisions, navigate challenges with a clear mindset, and ultimately live more purposefully. In business, Caraco's perspective reminds us that nothing lasts forever, not even the most successful companies or dominant industries. Market trends shift, consumer behavior evolves, and technology continuously disrupts traditional models. Companies that fail to recognize this impermanence often find themselves struggling to adapt. Blockbuster is a textbook example once a giant in the home entertainment industry. It dismissed the rise of digital streaming and ultimately collapsed while Netflix, which embraced change, thrived. The same pattern can be seen with Kodak, which dominated photography for decades but failed to transition into the digital era despite having the technology to do so before its competitors. These failures illustrate Caraco's fundamental idea. Clinging to the illusion of stability is a fatal mistake. Businesses that refuse to change will eventually become obsolete. However, Bahnsen's philosophy offers an important counterbalance. While change is inevitable, that does not mean businesses should chase every trend without a clear sense of direction. A company that constantly reinvents itself without staying true to its core values risks losing its identity and alienating its customers. Apple is an example of a company that balances change with consistency. While it continuously innovates in terms of product design and technology, it has maintained its core vision of user-friendly, aesthetically pleasing, and high-quality devices. Even as the market changes, Apple stays true to its core principles while adapting to new trends. Bahnsen would argue that it is precisely through the struggle to maintain this balance that Apple has found meaning and longevity. Entrepreneurship itself embodies Bahnsen's belief that struggle gives life meaning. The path of an entrepreneur is filled with obstacles of financial risk, rejection, and uncertainty. Startups fail at an astonishing rate, and those who succeed often do so after multiple setbacks. Elon Musk, for instance, nearly lost both Tesla and SpaceX in 2008. Both companies were on the verge of collapse, and he had to personally invest his remaining money to keep them afloat. The struggle was brutal, but it was also the very thing that made success meaningful. Had Musk accepted failure as the inevitable result of impermanence, he might have walked away. Instead, he persisted, and today, both companies are industry leaders. This same dynamic applies to relationships. Caraco's philosophy teaches us that no relationship is permanent. People change, circumstances shift, and even the deepest bonds can fade over time. Accepting this reality allows us to love more freely without being paralyzed by the fear of loss. Many people cling to relationships out of a desire for stability, even when those relationships are no longer healthy or fulfilling. They hold on to the illusion that love, once found, should last forever. Caraco would argue that this is a misunderstanding of reality. Instead of fearing change, we should embrace it and appreciate relationships for what they are in the moment, rather than trying to force them to last indefinitely. However, Bahnsen's philosophy challenges us to see relationships as something worth fighting for. Just because nothing lasts forever does not mean love is meaningless. The effort to build and sustain a relationship is what gives it value. Marriages that last for decades do so not because love remains unchanged, but because both partners actively work through struggles and evolve together. The idea that relationships require effort aligns with Bahnsen's belief that meaning is found in struggle. Those who expect love to be effortless are often the first to walk away at the first sign of difficulty. On the other hand, those who recognize that challenges are a natural part of any relationship and actively work through them find deeper, more fulfilling connections. Take the example of a long-distance relationship. Many couples in this situation struggle with the uncertainty of whether they can maintain their bond while being physically apart. Caraco's perspective would suggest that since all relationships are temporary, it might be better to let go rather than fight against the inevitable drift. But Bahnsen would argue that the struggle itself is what makes the relationship meaningful. The effort to stay connected, to overcome distance, and to work toward a future together is what gives the relationship its significance. Some couples may not survive the challenge, but those who do often come out stronger, with a deeper appreciation for one another. Personal growth is another area where these philosophies intersect. People often resist change because they are attached to a certain version of themselves. They fear stepping outside their comfort zones because doing so means letting go of the familiar. Caraco's philosophy teaches us that change is inevitable, so resisting it only leads to suffering. A person who clings to an outdated self-image, whether it be the high school athlete who refuses to accept aging, or to the professional who fears transitioning into a new career, will find themselves stuck in a cycle of denial and disappointment. Accepting impermanence allows us to move forward and embrace new opportunities rather than being trapped by who we once were. At the same time, Bahnsen would argue that self-improvement requires struggle. Growth does not happen passively. It happens through adversity. Consider someone trying to lose weight or build a new skill. The process is difficult. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, and periods of frustration. But it is precisely through this difficulty that real transformation occurs. A person who views challenges as obstacles will give up at the first sign of struggle, while someone who sees them as essential to growth will push through. This applies to any area of life, from learning a new language to recovering from personal trauma. The effort to overcome difficulties is what makes the achievement meaningful. The ability to balance these perspectives is what leads to a fulfilling life. If we only embrace Caraco's viewpoint, we risk becoming detached and indifferent, avoiding commitment and effort because we see everything as temporary. If we only follow Bahnsen's philosophy, we may push ourselves to exhaustion, never allowing ourselves to accept the natural flow of change. The key is to integrate both, to accept that nothing lasts forever while still finding purpose in the struggle. A practical example of this balance can be seen in career changes. Many people experience moments where they feel stuck in a job that no longer fulfills them. Caraco's philosophy would encourage them to recognize that careers, like everything else, are impermanent, and there is no reason to stay in a situation that no longer serves them. However, Bahnsen's philosophy would remind them that simply quitting without effort is not the answer. The struggle to transition, to learn new skills, and to adapt to a different field is what gives the journey meaning. Those who acknowledge impermanence while also embracing effort are the ones who successfully reinvent themselves. Parenting is another area where these ideas intersect. No parent can control every aspect of their child's future. Caraco's philosophy suggests that parents must accept that their children will grow into independent individuals who will eventually make their own choices. Trying to hold onto them too tightly or control their paths is a recipe for disappointment. However, Bahnsen's philosophy emphasizes the importance of the struggle involved in raising a child. The effort parents put into guiding, supporting, and nurturing their children is meaningful, even if the outcome is uncertain. The paradox is that good parenting requires both letting go and holding on, accepting change while still being committed to the process. The ultimate lesson from these philosophies is that impermanence does not mean passivity. Life is constantly changing, and nothing we build will last forever. But that does not mean we should not build. Meaning is not found in permanence, but in the act of striving. The artist who paints knowing that their work may one day be forgotten still finds joy in creation. The entrepreneur who builds a business knowing that industries shift still finds purpose in innovation. The person who loves despite knowing that relationships evolve still experiences the beauty of connection. By integrating Caraco's acceptance of impermanence with Bahnsen's belief in meaningful struggle, we can navigate life with both wisdom and purpose. Each person's perception of life is shaped by their experiences, beliefs, and struggles. Some people view existence as inherently meaningless, a fleeting series of events leading to an inevitable end, while others find purpose in relationships, achievements, or personal growth. The question of whether life has meaning is not one with a single definitive answer. It is deeply personal, influenced by both philosophical perspective and lived experience. Albert Caraco and Julius Bahnsen represent two opposing yet complementary approaches to this question. Caraco's nihilism suggests that because everything eventually disappears, nothing truly matters. Bahnsen, on the other hand, argues that struggle itself gives life its meaning. The tension between these views invites reflection on one's own beliefs. Consider the question, is there something in life truly worth pursuing? Many people find meaning in their careers, believing that hard work and professional success validate their existence. Others prioritize relationships, believing that love and connection provide fulfillment. Some dedicate themselves to causes larger than themselves, helping others, advancing scientific knowledge, or creating art that outlives them. But is any of this truly meaningful, or is it simply a way to distract ourselves from the ultimate impermanence of everything? A person aligned with Caraco's philosophy might say that all these pursuits are illusions, temporary satisfactions masking the void. A Bahnsen-influenced thinker, however, would argue that even if nothing is permanent, the pursuit itself gives life depth and significance. Fear of change is another deeply human experience. People often resist it because they find comfort in stability. Relationships, careers, personal identities. When these aspects of life shift, it can feel unsettling. But what if resistance to change is actually a source of suffering? If one embraces Caraco's perspective, they may argue that clinging to stability is futile, as everything inevitably changes. The dissolution of a long-term relationship, the loss of a job, or a drastic shift in personal beliefs can be painful. But Caraco would suggest that this is simply the natural course of existence. The more we try to hold on to something, the more we set ourselves up for disappointment. At the same time, Bahnsen would not advocate for passive acceptance of change. He would say that struggle against change, or adaptation in response to it, is what gives a person resilience. A business professional who sees their industry evolving may feel anxious about the uncertainty, but instead of resigning themselves to irrelevance, they can learn new skills, pivot, and find renewed purpose. An athlete who suffers a career-ending injury might feel their identity is lost, but they can take their experience and mentor the next generation. Struggle in response to change creates meaning. Without challenge, there is no growth. Many people have gone through personal struggles that, at the time, felt unbearable. A breakup, a failed project, a major setback. These moments often feel like evidence that life is unfair or meaningless. But with time and perspective, many people later recognize these moments as turning points. A failed business venture may have taught an entrepreneur lessons that led to their future success. A heartbreak might have allowed someone to find a more fulfilling relationship later. Even grief, one of the most painful experiences, often leads to deeper emotional wisdom. This is Bahnsen's philosophy in action. Meaning does not come from avoiding pain, but from experiencing it and transforming it into growth. Reflecting on one's perspective is not just an intellectual exercise, it shapes how people respond to life's challenges. A person who leans toward Caraco's mindset may feel detached, seeing life's ups and downs as ultimately insignificant. This detachment can be liberating, freeing them from unnecessary suffering over things beyond their control. However, taken to the extreme, this perspective can lead to apathy or lack of motivation. If nothing matters, why try? Why invest in relationships or personal growth? Conversely, someone who embraces Bahnsen's perspective may find themselves constantly striving, fighting through every difficulty, determined to make their life meaningful through effort. This can be empowering, but also has risks. If someone believes that struggle is the only way to create meaning, they may overextend themselves, leading to burnout. They may become so fixated on proving their resilience that they never allow themselves to simply be. The key is balance. Recognizing the impermanence of everything, as Caraco suggests, allows a person to avoid excessive attachment and disappointment. But understanding, as Bahnsen does, that struggle is the essence of life helps a person find purpose in their efforts. The two perspectives do not have to be mutually exclusive. A person can accept that nothing lasts forever while still striving to make the most of their time. They can recognize that pain and hardship are unavoidable, but also see them as opportunities for growth. Personal reflections on these ideas often lead to questions about legacy. If everything is temporary, is there value in trying to leave a lasting impact? Caraco would likely say, no history forgets even the greatest figures. Bahnsen would argue that impact, even if temporary, matters because it shapes the present. A teacher who inspires a student may never be remembered, but their influence could change the course of that student's life. A scientist who makes a breakthrough may not be recognized in the long term, but their work contributes to the collective progress of humanity. Modern life presents many opportunities to apply these perspectives. Social media, for instance, creates an illusion of permanence. People document their lives, curate their identities, and seek validation through online presence. But as Caraco would point out, trends fade, platforms evolve, and digital footprints disappear. Is it worth investing energy in creating an online persona that will eventually be forgotten? Perhaps the better question is whether the act of self-expression itself is meaningful, regardless of its longevity. Education is another area where these ideas play out. Students often feel immense pressure to achieve academic success, believing that grades and degrees define their future. From a Caraco perspective, these achievements are fleeting. Exams are forgotten, institutions evolve, and knowledge itself is constantly revised. But from Bahnsen's perspective, the process of learning, struggling through difficult subjects, and developing critical thinking is what truly matters. The diploma may be a temporary marker, but the personal growth that comes from education lasts. Philosophy is not just about abstract thought, it is about shaping one's response to life. Those who see life as meaningless may feel freed from pressure but risk detachment. Those who see struggle as the key to meaning may be highly motivated but risk exhaustion. The challenge is to find a middle ground, accepting impermanence while engaging deeply in the moment, recognizing that while nothing lasts, the experience of striving, loving, and growing is what makes life worth living. Each person must ultimately decide for themselves which perspective resonates more. Is the goal to detach from expectations and accept the fleeting nature of everything? Or is it to fight for meaning through effort and struggle? Perhaps it is a combination of both. In either case, the important thing is not to blindly adopt a philosophy, but to think critically, question assumptions, and engage with life on one's own terms. This is not a discussion with one right answer. Different people will resonate with different aspects of these philosophies based on their own experiences. Some may feel that they have spent too long fighting against change and need to embrace Caraco's acceptance of impermanence. Others may feel they have been too passive and need to adopt Bahnsen's belief in struggle as a path to meaning. The key is not to see these perspectives as rigid dogmas, but as tools for self-reflection. Philosophy, at its core, is about dialogue not just with historical figures, but with ourselves and those around us. By engaging in discussions about these ideas, people refine their own beliefs and challenge assumptions. The invitation to reflect is not just an academic exercise, it is an opportunity to live more intentionally. Whether one leans toward Caraco's nihilism or Bahnsen's tragic realism, the most valuable thing is to think, to question, and to engage in an ongoing conversation about what it means to exist. Albert Caraco's perspective is a stark reminder that nothing lasts forever. He urges us to abandon the illusion of permanence and accept that everything, our relationships, ambitions, even civilizations, will eventually fade into nothingness. From his standpoint, seeking stability or absolute meaning is an exercise in futility, because the very fabric of existence is transient. If we hold on to things too tightly, expecting them to remain unchanged, we set ourselves up for disappointment and suffering. The idea that we can carve out something permanent in an impermanent world is, to Caraco, self-deception. Instead, he calls for acceptance and understanding that the only certainty in life is change. If we embrace this, we free ourselves from unnecessary attachments and begin to live with a more profound awareness of the present. On the other hand, Julius Bahnsen insists that meaning is not something life hands to us, but something we must create through struggle. He acknowledges that life is chaotic, uncertain, and often unfair. But instead of surrendering to these realities, he sees them as an opportunity. The tension between our desires and the realities of the world is not a flaw, it is what gives life depth. We find meaning not in achieving some final, unchanging state of fulfillment, but in the act of striving itself. The most profound moments in life are born out of effort, hardship, and perseverance. While Caraco warns against clinging to illusions, Bahnsen warns against the passivity that comes from fully accepting life's transience without attempting to shape it. These two perspectives might seem irreconcilable at first, one advocating for letting go, the other for pushing forward, but perhaps the real answer lies in their synthesis. A balanced approach acknowledges that everything changes while also recognizing that the struggle to create, to improve, and to leave an impact is still worthwhile. If we embrace Caraco's understanding that nothing is permanent, we can stop fearing change and learn to adapt. If we embrace Bahnsen's belief that struggle itself gives life meaning, we can continue striving even when we know that the results will not last forever. This balance can be seen in everyday life. Consider an artist who knows that their work, no matter how celebrated, will eventually be forgotten. Does this mean they should stop creating? Caraco would argue that, given enough time, all art fades into obscurity, so there is no inherent value in the act of creation. But Bahnsen would argue that the process itself, the challenge of bringing an idea to life, the effort, the passion is where the real meaning lies. The artist who understands both perspectives does not create to be remembered forever, but because the act of creating is meaningful in the present. In relationships, we see the same dynamic. No love is permanent. People change, circumstances evolve, and even the strongest relationships must eventually end, whether through separation or death. If we adopt only Caraco's mindset, we might hesitate to fully commit, fearing inevitable loss. If we adopt only Bahnsen's mindset, we might cling too tightly, refusing to accept that change is natural. But if we take from both, we can love deeply while knowing that nothing is guaranteed. This allows us to appreciate relationships for what they are in the moment without being paralyzed by their eventual transformation. The workplace is another space where this balance is necessary. Careers evolve, industries shift, and no job lasts forever. Those who resist change, believing they have found permanent stability, often find themselves unprepared when reality inevitably shifts. But those who constantly chase change without grounding themselves in any deeper purpose can end up feeling directionless. The best approach is to acknowledge that no job is forever while still dedicating oneself fully to the work at hand. Success, in this sense, is not measured by whether one achieves some final, unchanging goal, but by how one navigates the journey. This synthesis is particularly crucial when facing personal hardships. If we embrace only Caraco's view, we might conclude that suffering is pointless and resign ourselves to apathy. If we embrace only Bahnsen's view, we might see suffering as something that must always be conquered, rather than something to learn from. But in reality, struggle is neither meaningless nor something to be defeated entirely. It is an integral part of life, shaping who we are. Accepting suffering without being defined by it, learning from it without allowing it to consume us, that is the middle ground. Even in a broader societal sense, history shows the necessity of both perspectives. Movements for social change are often built on the belief that things can be improved through effort, an inherently Bahnsian idea. But at the same time, history reminds us that no progress is permanent. Civilizations rise and fall, laws evolve, and societal norms shift. Recognizing this Caraco-esque reality does not mean abandoning progress. It means understanding that change is constant and requires ongoing effort. Those who accept only one side of this equation either burn out trying to force permanence onto an impermanent world, or become passive observers, assuming that because nothing lasts, action is meaningless. In a way, our entire existence is a dialogue between these two viewpoints. There's a part of us that yearns for stability, for something that feels lasting. And there is another part that understands, even if reluctantly, that everything is in motion. We are all navigating this tension, trying to find a way to live fully in a world that offers no guarantees. Some people naturally lean more toward one perspective than the other. Some are more inclined to accept the fleeting nature of things, while others feel more compelled to push against it. But the most fulfilling approach might be to borrow from both, to embrace change while still finding meaning in our efforts. This does not mean that everyone must find the same balance. Different people will interpret these ideas in different ways, applying them to their own lives based on their experiences and values. Some may find peace in accepting impermanence fully, while others may be driven by the pursuit of meaning through struggle. There is no single right way to live, only the way that aligns most authentically with one's own understanding of the world. If there is one takeaway from this exploration, it is that philosophy is not just about abstract ideas. It is about how we live, whether we acknowledge it or not. We are constantly making philosophical choices: how we respond to setbacks, how we handle change, how we pursue our goals. Caraco and Bahnsen offer two powerful lenses through which to view these choices, and by engaging with their ideas, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves. The best thing we can do is continue to question, to reflect, and to seek wisdom wherever we find it. Reading philosophy is not about finding definitive answers, but about expanding the way we think. If this discussion has made you reconsider your own views, then it has done its job. The dialogue does not end here. It is something that each of us continues, in our own way, throughout our lives. Whether we lean toward Caraco's acceptance of impermanence or Bahnsen's belief in struggle, the key is to live intentionally, embracing both the reality of change and the pursuit of meaning. So, after exploring these two opposing yet strangely complementary perspectives, where do you stand? Do you resonate with Caraco's chilling acceptance of impermanence, the idea that no matter what we do, nothing truly lasts? Or do you find yourself drawn to Bahnsen's conviction that meaning is forged in struggle, that life's battles are what define us? Perhaps the answer isn't about choosing one side or the other. Maybe the secret is in balance, embracing the reality of impermanence while still fighting for something greater. Imagine living with the awareness that nothing is permanent, yet using that very knowledge to fuel your passion, relationships, and ambitions. What would your life look like if you let go of your fear of change while still pursuing what matters? If this discussion has made you question your own beliefs, if it sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below and tell me. Does life have meaning, or is it all just an illusion? Let's start a conversation. Because philosophy isn't just about reading, it's about challenging ourselves and each other. And if you got value from this video, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps this channel alive, and if you'd like to show some extra appreciation, hit that super thanks button to help us keep making thought-provoking content like this. The journey to understanding life's biggest questions never truly ends, but for today, we'll leave it here. Until next time, stay curious, stay open-minded, and most importantly, stay questioning.